Just as a rocket has a trajectory, which is basically it's a pathway that an obstacle is put on, as something is put on with some type of propulsion or force added to it. Well, our lives are no different. We are on a trajectory. And what fuels the pathway of our life are two factors: God's design and our choices. Those are the two things that fuel the trajectory of our life. And as I said before, we're going to look at how a single question can create a defining moment that can change and alter the pathway, the trajectory of your life. Now, here's what's interesting about a defining moment. You don't know when they're coming. You can't predict them. And they could come in the simplest or most complicated of ways. But when a defining moment happens, you know, because it has the power to alter your life. And we're going to see in just a few minutes how one of the most well-known prophets in the Old Testament came to the end of his rope. He was done. He was completely finished. He was at rock bottom, and he was done. His life was turned around from a single question, which tells you how powerful questions really are. Because what a question does, a question unlocks files in your brain. A lot of times we think, well, I need to find the right solution, and we focus on the solution, and that's actually the wrong technique. In fact, you need to focus on the right question. If you find the right question, your mind will find the solution. You see, the question puts your brain on a pathway. It's fascinating. I dug into this a little bit because I was so interested by it, because our brain has all these files. And a lot of these files are pushed back because as we grow older, we have more files, more. And we don't remember things all the time. That's why pictures bring back memories, songs will take us back. But our brain has all this stuff locked away. We just need something to open the file. Questions are the prompts that guide our thinking. And questions are quite powerful. And I'm going to let you, parents, especially parents of young kids, I'm going to let you behind the curtain just a little bit on what's going on back here in the back part of our building. You see, we know things about you. It's a trick. Everybody in kids ministry has been doing it for decades. See, there's one simple question that is asked back in our kids ministry building, and it lets us behind your curtain. That question is this: does anyone have a prayer request? That question gives me power over you. That one question takes us into what's going on in your family, because here's the deal, especially if you have a pre-K, kindergarten, first grader, they get into that time and they're in their small group, and when they're asked, hey, do you have a prayer request? Well, they don't like, there's this one-upmanship. So this kid, something really big happened. Well, this next kid's going to make something up because this one's not going to outdo this one. And I'm not kidding you. Steph and I were working with some pre-K kids once, and somebody got bit by a dog. Well, you could see the wheels in this next kid's eyes. I mean, he got bit by a snake. And then you saw this one over here, and then he got bit by a snake. I said, really, what kind of snake bit you? He said, it was a rattlemouth cottonhead. I said, okay. I said, I know what country you've been to, but I've never heard of that snake. But they try to one-up each other. But the best is whenever you get in a fight on the way to church. That's the best. Because prayer request time is coming up. You can't stop it. No, that trash is going to be talked about. I promise you. I promise you. So be kind to those who work with your kids. And I'm not even kidding. But let's go back to our prophet who's hit rock bottom, and how a question became a defining moment that changed the trajectory of his life. To do that, we're going to go all the way back, and we're going to start in chapter 18 of 1 Kings. And I'm going to basically I'm going to give you the narrative instead of me reading a lot of the scripture for the sake of time. But I do encourage you today, tomorrow, this week, to read chapters 18 and 19 of 1 Kings. It will really help to solidify this and to cement it in your head. But here's the story. So you have this guy, King Ahab. He's a bad dude. According to scripture, he ticked God off more than any other king. Those are my words, not the Bible's. But he ticked God off in ways that other kings didn't. Then Ahab, in his great brilliance, then decided to marry the psychopath Jezebel. Again, my word. That's not in the Old Testament. Jezebel is bad news. This woman is messed up. She's mean. She's rotten. She introduces the worship of Baal and Asherah to the Israelites. And she's also the queen patron to 450 prophets of Baal, false prophets, and 400 false prophets of Asherah. And now they've got the Israelites, God's people, worshiping these idols. And Elijah, the prophet, is on the scene. And he knows what his calling is. He knows what his purpose, his destiny is. It is to erase the worship of false idols from God's people. They've been struggling with this for years. So God tells Elijah, go to King Ahab and tell him, no rain, no dew for years, until Elijah comes back and says, it's good to rain. Elijah goes and tells Ahab this. Ahab is mad, doesn't matter. There's a drought in the land. About 3 years later, God tells Elijah, go back to King Ahab and tell him, hey, it's going to rain. It's going to rain. But before it does, there's going to be a little showdown at Mount Carmel. And what's going to happen is this. Elijah told King Ahab, I want you to get all your prophets and God's people, bring them to Mount Carmel, and we're going to have a contest to see whose God really is God. If you've grown up in a church, you know this story. So they build 2 altars. Elijah lets the prophets of Baal and Asherah go first. They do. They start calling on their God, and I love the sarcasm that Elijah has. He literally said to them, oh, hey, yell louder. I don't think he can hear you. You know what? He may not be at home. I bet he's in the bathroom. And that's in the Bible. I didn't make that up. That's exactly what it says. Not even making it up. And I love how Elijah was taunting these guys. And finally, the sun was going down. And he goes, okay, ball game, enough. You had your shot. Now it's time for the sacrifice. He builds the altar. They put the bull that they're going to sacrifice on the altar. Then Elijah says, hey, just to make this fun, go get a bunch of water. Let's douse this whole sacrifice, the altar. He digs a trench around the altar. And then when the water is applied, there was so much water, drenched the sacrifice, drenched the wood. It was all in the trench. Elijah called on God. Fire supernaturally falls from heaven, consumes the sacrifice, the altar, and all of the water. And when that happened, then Elijah goes to King Ahab and says, hey, why don't you go get something to eat, chill out. I'm going to go take care of this rain situation, and then we'll get back together. So Elijah goes up to the top of the mountain, calls on God to bring the rain. Sends a servant to the cliff. Do you see anything? Nope. Does it 7 times. And the 7th time, he says, I see a cloud, a very small cloud about the size of a hand. Elijah said, bingo, there it is. Go tell Ahab to get home quick. Now, this was the wicked King Ahab. He said, tell Ahab to get in his chariot and go now, because there's one thing that a chariot is no good in. It is useless in mud. So Elijah knows there's a flood coming. Tell Ahab to go home. Then here's where the story gets interesting to me. I mean, it's been interesting from the beginning, but nonetheless, this is kind of a neat little twist. God gives Elijah power and strength to run ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to where they lived in Jezreel. So Elijah runs ahead of King Ahab, and he's there at Jezreel. Ahab goes in to tell his wife, the wicked Queen Jezebel, what had happened. He tells Jezebel what happened. Now, why do you think, I started thinking, why in the world would Elijah, the prophet, who he already knows they want him dead, why did he make such an effort? Why did he ask God to give him strength to run ahead of that chariot so he could be there when Ahab gave Jezebel the news? Well, it's simple. Elijah knew, he was convinced this was going to turn everything around. This whole struggle, this whole problem with idol worship is going to end. What Ahab saw, now Jezebel didn't see the supernatural move of God. She didn't see it, but Ahab did. Ahab was saying, oh, and by the way, they killed all your prophets. The 450 prophets of Baal, the 400 prophets of Asherah, they took them down into the valley and they terminated every one of them. So Elijah thought, this is it. This is the turning point where these 2 wicked leaders are going to turn their hearts toward God. It's going to be different now going forward. What does Jezebel do? She says, may the gods strike me dead if I don't kill you before the end of this day. This is exactly, and Ahab went home. He told Jezebel everything that Elijah had done, including the way he had killed the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. May the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you killed them. Now, if you go back a little bit further, Elijah had some other cool things happen where God sustained him during the drought by sending food down from heaven, providing water miraculously. He sees the fire come down from heaven. The prophets of Baal and Asherah were killed. And this queen says, may I be struck dead if you're not dead by this time tomorrow. And this person who has experienced all these incredible moves of God, what does he do? Out of absolute fear, tucks his tail and he runs. Not only does he run, but he runs a ridiculous amount of distance away, completely unnecessary. He runs and he flees into the desert. He finds a tree, a particular desert tree called a broom tree. He gets under that tree and he says these words, God, take my life. I'm going to paraphrase here. I'm done. I'm finished. This whole thing's jacked up. Nothing went the way it was supposed to go. Nothing went according to plan. I'm finished. And now I've got Psycho Queen chasing me, trying to kill me. I'm finished. I'm done. I'm tapping out. That's over. An angel comes and visits Elijah, tells him to rest, gives him some food, does it again, and then tells him to make his way to Mount Sinai. Interestingly enough, the same place that God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. When Elijah gets to Mount Sinai, a question was asked, and it was this. God said to him, Elijah, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Now understand what the question that's being asked. It wasn't punitive. It wasn't even corrective. Elijah was there because the messenger from God told him to go there. So God was asking him a much bigger question. What are you doing here? Because he was in a place mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually that he didn't have to be. And we see 5 things that Elijah was struggling with. Number 1, he was struggling with disillusionment. Elijah was disillusioned. He was convinced that these 2 miracles would bring about a change in Ahab and a change in Jezebel, and that idol worship was going to be gone forever. And in a moment, in an instance, and a mere sentence from Queen Jezebel, it all ended. The plan was gone. His purpose was gone. This is why he was here. He's disillusioned. The second thing we see Elijah struggling with is this. Elijah was discouraged. Elijah was discouraged. You ever been there? I have. Elijah lost his zeal, his enthusiasm. He lost his passion that just a short while ago fueled his faith. Those things were the very fuel to his faith just days ago. And now he finds himself in the desert, exhausted, confused, and wanting to die. He's now completely lost all of his confidence. Elijah was disillusioned. He was discouraged. The third thing we see him struggling with is he was doubtful. Elijah was doubtful. The incredible faith exercised just a short time before is now gone, and in its place is doubt. Without faith and confidence, Elijah gives in to overwhelming uncertainty, and it leads to fear. That's why when he stood in front of all those prophets, 850 prophets or so, he had complete confidence. He knew what God was going to do. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid that the crowd was going to turn on him. He wasn't afraid that God wasn't going to show up. And now, all of a sudden, after a great victory, Elijah finds himself the man of faith with no faith. It was all doubt. And this is for free. Be cautious. Be vigilant. Because the enemy, who the scripture describes him as a lion, that's sneaking around looking for those he can devour. The enemy, what I've discovered in my years, attacks in 2 places, my highs and my lows. He doesn't attack here, it doesn't seem. When I'm steady, I'm even, I'm balanced. That's not where the attacks seem to come. The attacks seem to come on the highs. When things go right, things go well. All of a sudden, here it comes. Here comes the temptation. Here comes this. Or on the lows. On the lows when my faith is depleted. And I'm sitting going, what? God, you said this was going to happen. I don't see it. I'm waiting. Whenever you're ready. And that's the funny thing. God has never cooperated with my plan once. Not once. And we're going to chat about that one day. No, I'm just kidding. Seriously, I was just kidding. I'm not going to bring it up. But I have I'm going to be honest with you. I don't mean to be prideful. One of the things I'm most prideful of is my humility, just to be honest with you. That's sarcasm for anybody that's, okay. But I put together some really cool plans. I'm going to tell you the truth, Kelvin. I've put together some really cool plans, some really cool steps, and looked at it and said, there is no way God isn't going to bless this and put this into place. Let's go. Nothing. None of it happened. I know what it's like to feel disillusioned when things didn't go the way I thought they should. I know what it's like to be discouraged and just have that zeal and that passion gone. I know what it feels like to be doubtful and that faith just isn't there. The other thing we see in Elijah that he was struggling with was he was depleted. He was completely depleted. The spiritual, physical, and emotional demands depleted Elijah of his resources. And he was suffering from what some call combat exhaustion. There's another expression we use at times. He left it all in the field. He's got nothing left. And that's what he did. He put it all out on the field. He was completely drained. This is one of the most vulnerable, dangerous places you can be. Because, well, I know when I'm physically depleted, I know I'm setting myself up for trouble. When I'm emotionally depleted, I know I'm setting myself up for trouble. When I'm spiritually depleted, of course. But man, when I'm physically done, emotionally done, spiritually done, the enemy's going, all right where I want you. Here it comes. Here's the knockout punch. He was depleted. The last thing I want to share with you that I see in Elijah is that Elijah was depressed and consumed with despair. He was completely consumed with despair. There seemed to be no hope, no more purpose. And here's the deal. When you get to a point where you feel like you have no purpose, there will be no hope. You won't feel any sense of hope if your sense of purpose is gone. Elijah was stuck in this cycle. And here's what's interesting. He goes to Mount Sinai. God asked him the question. I'm going to find his exact words because it's absolutely something. So God says, Elijah, what are you doing here? And I don't see it. Anyway, it's there. I know it's there. I remember reading it. But somehow or another, I thought it went to my notes and it didn't. But in essence, it was this. When God said, Elijah, what are you doing here? Elijah goes into this self-pity, whining, complaining. God, they wouldn't listen. There's nobody's cooperating. I'm the only prophet. I'm the only one who really serves you that's left. Everybody else is gone. Everybody else is compromised. Everybody else is this, that, and the other. And then God said, come on out. I want to show you something. Then there was a great fire. God wasn't there. There was a great wind. God wasn't there. The earth shook. There's an earthquake. God wasn't there. And then, have you ever been in a situation where something was so quiet it was deafening? That's what I see happening here. It goes from all this loud noise, visual theophany, that all of a sudden, it's so quiet, it's deafening. Then God says to him, Elijah, what are you doing here? And what does Elijah do? Gives him the exact same answer. He says the exact same thing. Nothing had changed. Nothing for Elijah had changed at all. His response was verbatim of what it was before. It was a complaint. It was whining. It was self-pity. God, there's nobody else but me. Everyone else has deserted you. It's only me. There's nobody else. See, when you are struggling with disillusionment, discouragement, doubtfulness, depletion, despair, there's no way your perspective is going to be right. There's no way you're going to be thinking clearly. There's no way that you are going to really be able to hear God the way that you need to because you're positioned wrongly. So something has to change. And I just thought it was interesting for a guy he saw God do so many super cool things, supernatural things. I mean, he ran home ahead of a chariot. And that wasn't even the biggest deal. He saw God provide food from the sky. He saw him provide water when no one else had water. He saw fire coming down from heaven. He saw a lot of really cool things. Saw God end a drought. But he couldn't get past himself. When God said the second time, why are you here? What are you doing here? It was clear Elijah was stuck in a cycle and couldn't get out. What do we do when we're stuck in a cycle and can't get out? I'm going to share something with you. Before moving here, we lived in Southern California, and I very much was a beach rat. Loved the beach, loved the waves. And a few years back, Stephanie and I had a chance to go, my wife Steph had a chance to go to Hawaii for our anniversary. We had never been before. I think it was our 20th. 20th. And it was super cool. It was fun. So she and I we're on the island of Kauai, which if you know that island, it's just an island. You don't go there for entertainment. You go there just to chill out. Great beaches. Well, we were walking on the beach one day, and there had been a storm out in the Pacific. So what that meant was the waves coming in, they were choice. The barrels were huge. And now, when you go to a proper beach, you should see at each of the lifeguard stations flags. Have you guys ever noticed flags at the beach? And they have different flags that represent different things. I should have brought some photos, but some flags will tell you that the rip current is strong, that pulls you to the side. Some will tell you that the undertow is strong, which pulls you down and under. That's a yellow flag, yellow and black, it's yellow and blue. But there's one flag that you can't mistake, one flag you can't screw up. It's the red flag. When the red flag is flying on the beach, can you guess what that means?
Don't get in the water.
Stay out of the water. When I saw the red flag, you know what I saw? Get in the water, it's fun. They're trying to keep you from having fun. This is the man trying to keep you down. No, I was not going to. And Stephanie even said, and I didn't have a board, I didn't have any fins, had nothing. And Stephanie goes, I remember her looking at me, she goes, no. She could see it in my eyes. I thought, look at those barrels, they're huge. I'm playing in it. So even if you don't have a board, you can still play in the waves, ride a couple just with your body. It's still fun. So I did. And I knew, spent a lot of time in the water. I knew I had to gauge my energy because whatever it took you to get out, you got to use that same energy to get back in. So how do you get back in with waves of that size? Well, you just have to stay ahead of it. It's all a timing game. I went out, I was toying around the waves, started to feel a little tired, and thought I need to go back in. I start going back in, and the waves come in sets. And those sets, it's very cool. They will have a rhythm, a timing, and they'll be right on pace. So if you can see the sets coming, and if you could get the timing right, then they stay consistent all the way through. But every now and then, the set will change, and you don't know it. And these were big waves, powerful waves. And so I'd gone out, I'm coming back in. I'm looking behind me to see how the sets are coming in and where the barrels are landing, and you want to stay just ahead of it. Here we go. Take a nice little fun ride in. As I turn my back and take about the third or fourth stroke, all of a sudden, the rhythm changed. And when it did, it felt like someone dropped a building on me. Because that big barrel came over and hit right on top of my head. Drove me straight down to the ocean floor, which I estimate to be about where I was, about 10 feet, 10 or 11 feet. Straight down to the ocean floor. Now, one thing to remember, now see, you're getting more information about waves than you ever thought you would, right? The bigger the wave, the stronger the undertow. So if you've ever been at the beach, you know that undertow, if it's strong, it literally pulls you. So I call this the washing machine. Because what happens is you get hit on top of the head with water, it forces you down to the floor of the ocean, and then the undertow takes you and pulls you out. Then you come back up, and you're just hoping you're in the middle of the set. Well, that didn't happen. I came up, boom, hit me around the head again, drove me straight down. And by the third time that happened, there's no orientation. You can't tell where you are. And at one point, I didn't know if I was swimming up or swimming down. I couldn't tell. I was now exhausted. I'd taken in a lot of water. My eyes were burning. And to make a long story short, I remember I had nothing left. I was depleted, done. There's no way, I was too far out, couldn't make it back in. I couldn't get out of the washing machine. I couldn't get out of the cycle. They hit me again, drove me straight to the bottom, pulled me back out. Everything I fought for was all for naught. And I remember coming to a point where it was the most exhausted I've ever been physically my entire life. I almost couldn't raise my arms. That's how much I had been fighting. And I remember coming up enough to be able to see Stephanie on the beach. And I see this. Come in. I'm drowning. She's telling me, come in. Like she's aggravated at me. What are you doing? But I was done. God is my witness. Strike me dead if I'm exaggerating any part of this. I literally looked at her and I asked God to forgive me for wasting my life over playing in some waves. Because I didn't have anything. I couldn't raise my arms. I was finished. And I remember, I don't even remember crying. I just remember talking about sorrow, despair. I literally asked God to forgive me for trashing my life in front of my wife over some silly waves. Hey, the way some of you are looking at me right now, spoiler alert, I made it. A couple of you looked really worried. So it's okay. I got out of there. We're all good. But it was only by God's grace. I came up. I put my arms to my side, asked God to forgive me, and just waited to sink. And I'm not even kidding. I don't know how to articulate that feeling of despair, knowing I'm about to see Jesus and he may be ticked. But then at that moment, the set changed. The next big wave that came over hit me right in my back, shot me straight out of the water toward the shore. The next set came and hit me right behind my lower back, shot me straight out of the water toward the shore. 3 of them hit me. Now I had hope. I think, because I'm starting to feel sand under my toes. I can make this. I got to stay on top of the undertow, but I can make it. I did. And then, of course, I get to the beach, and Stephanie says, "What are you doing?" It's like, I almost died. You're asking me what I'm doing. But Elijah, when God asked him, "What are you doing here?" He was stuck in a cycle. And God, in his wisdom, because this incredible display that Elijah had seen, had experienced, didn't change him. That whole supernatural display didn't change him. He was still stuck where he was before. And God, in his wisdom, knew he's lost his sense of purpose. We're going to establish that first. Gave him a new sense of purpose with a new set of instructions and a new mission. And that's how God got Elijah out of that deadly cycle. That's how God got Elijah out of that despair. But what about with us? Let me ask you a question. Are you stuck in a negative, unhealthy, destructive cycle? Are you stuck and you've tried and you can't get out? To the point where you're tired, you're disillusioned, your life didn't turn out the way it was, you're discouraged, you're doubtful, Faith is gone. You're depleted. You got nothing left. All that leads to despair. The sickness unto death. How do you get out? Well, just like with Elijah, it begins with a new purpose. I want to give you 4 things as I close. I'm going to give you these 4 things that can help us get out of destructive cycles. Number 1, these are 4 things that are required from you and I to get out of a destructive cycle. Number 1 is authenticity. Authenticity. Simply put, and I'll move quickly, simply put, authenticity is just being real. Is it safe to say that in the church that sometimes we're not real? Is it safe to say that? Somewhat accurate? Oh, we all know it is. I'm being sarcastic. I know it is because I've done it. We know what's sad, what I really hate to confess to you right now, is that it was late in my life when I realized that I was not being authentic. We use a greeting in America. When someone says, hey, how are you doing? What's your response? Fine. How are you? Fine. Then you go on with your conversation. And it's okay. I'm not bagging on that. So don't check yourself today if somebody says, how are you doing? Say, fine. It's totally cool. Because there is a place to be authentic and share honestly. There's also a place not to. And that requires emotional intelligence. Some of us have it, some of us don't. But nonetheless, but just to be real. And I want to give you an example. So I love watches. I don't wear one, but I'm fascinated by them. And I've been fascinated by this one company, Tag Heuer. They make the most beautiful pieces of art that you wear on your wrist. They're fantastic. But that's a little outside of my pay grade. So I just observe from a distance. Well, on one of my trips to the Philippines, in Manila, there's a great place you can go buy knockoff of anything. I found a beautiful Tag Heuer watch for $50 US. Now, this watch is $8,000, $8,500 in America, so I knew it was a knockoff. I knew it wasn't real, but it looked great. It was beautiful. I finally have a tag. I finally have one. Like, I've made it. I've arrived, right? Moving up to the east side. So I've got this Tag Heuer. A buddy of mine in Orange County, he is a watch collector. He lives a different life. He lives on the other side of town from me. The watch he wears every day is worth more than all the cars in my driveway combined. He's just one of those guys. A super nice guy, but I came back and I couldn't wait to show Dave my watch. Dave, what? I got a tag. And he looked at it and goes, let me see. Oh, wow. He looked at it for about 6 or 7 seconds. He said, man, that is a really nice fake. That's a really decent fake. I go, fake? How do you know? You're not a horologist. How do you know it's a fake? I mean, you just looked at it for 5 or 6 seconds. He goes, well, I mean, no, it looks good. And then I thought he was judging me. Oh, you know I can't afford it. That's why you're saying it, right? So we're going to go there now. No, but the thing was, this man, that was his hobby. It didn't take him long at all to spot a fake. But when he said the word decent fake, that came back to me not all that long ago, and I thought, have I become a decent fake? I don't feel like I've ever pretended to be somebody I'm not to impress others. But what I do know is that even when the people closest to me say, Steve, how you doing? I'm great. Fine. No, I'm not struggling with this or struggling with that. And I'm not ticked off because this happened. No, I'm fine. You know why? Because there's things to do. There's work to be done. I don't have time for this. We'll deal with it later. And if we don't deal with it, I'm okay. So let's move on. You're cringing right now. I know, Dr. Walker, you're literally cringing as I say this. Because that's not healthy. But I developed a pattern, a habit of just pushing things to the side, pushing them down, pretending that they didn't bother me, pretending that I didn't care, pretending that I'm so strong that those words didn't hurt my feelings or that action didn't hurt me in some way. No, but you develop these habits, these patterns. Those words came back to me. It said, man, have I become a decent fake? You will, I mean this sincerely. If I'm wrong, then we can chat about it. I don't think you're going to grow in any aspect of your life, period, without authenticity. If you're not going to be real, just don't. Just don't, because it's not going to matter. All you're going to do is you're just going to develop stronger patterns of lack of authenticity. That's harder to say than you think. You just develop more and more patterns in that way. If we're not going to be real, and here was the sad part, is I noticed that even in my prayer time, I was crafting my prayers to God. Now, how stupid is that? This is the God of the universe. He knows every thought. He knows every hair on my head, even if there's less every day. But he knows, and here I am crafting my prayers to God as if he doesn't know I'm hurting on the inside. You will never grow. You'll never get out of the cycle you're in unless you are authentic. And you will have to decide what means more to me, my growth, my development as a Christ follower, as a leader, as a person, as a husband, as a wife, or what those people think of me. You're going to have to make that decision. And if you're going to decide the other, then I would just encourage you, be honest and just embrace that. But you'll never grow, you'll never get out of that cycle if you're not going to be honest and sincere with others and with God. Colossians 3:9-10 says, don't lie to each other, for you have stripped off your old evil nature and all its wicked deeds. Romans 12:2 says, don't copy the customs and behaviors of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will know what God wants you to do, and you will know how good and pleasing and perfect his will really is. The second thing that's required of us, if we're going to break unhealthy, dangerous cycles, is obedience. Sounds all too simple. We have to be authentic, and we have to obey. It sounds all too simple. But if it was that simple, I wouldn't be stuck in some of the patterns I'm in. Right? Philippians 3:16, but we must be sure, this is strong, this is Paul talking. Hear this, but we must be sure to obey the truth we already learned. So when God was dealing with Elijah, he didn't give him a new revelation. He didn't give him a new anything. He said, you already know what you're supposed to be doing. You already know the steps you're supposed to take. You already know. So now just do them. James 1:22, and remember, it's a message to obey, not just to listen to. If you don't obey, you're only fooling yourself. You have to be real. You have to obey. If you want to get out of that dangerous, that dangerous, unhealthy cycle, number 3, you have to surrender. Now, what do I mean by that? I know some of you are going to say, well, he just can't get away from the Play-Doh, can he? But you're going to present yourself to God in one of two ways. This is surrender. Moldable, pliable. This is surrender. And by the way, you can't obey and not be fully surrendered. There's a group called the, who were they? The religious leaders of the day. Pharisees, thank you. I just left my head. You'd be surprised what leaves my head, actually. The Pharisees were obedient to the law. But this pliability, moldability, this is me intentionally presenting myself to God as moldable, as teachable. This is humility. Surrender begins with humility. And if I have to stay in a constant mode of surrendering my mind, my eyes, my thoughts, my intentions, my attitudes, my words. And I'm telling you now, because I'll just tell you what's happened to me. In the weeks or the days that I'm not intentional, that's when I mess up. That's when there's some aspect of my life that I've taken back from God and said, you know what? Let me just have this just for a little bit. No, surrender has to be constant. This is the other side of surrender. See, you're either going to present yourself as moldable, pliable clay that God can work with, or you're going to present yourself like this: prideful, hard rock. You know what's best. You've got it figured out. Now, can the rock still be molded? Yeah, but it has to be crushed first. That doesn't sound cool. This is a deliberate decision. Submit yourselves, James 4 says, submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil and he will flee with you. Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do. and he will show you which path to take. So, we're authentic, we're obedient, we surrender. The fourth and last step that's required of us to get out of a dangerous, unhealthy cycle is resilience. Resilience. See, the question is not if you're gonna fall or get knocked down. That's not the question. The question is, when you do get knocked down and fall, what will you do? It's going to happen. Am I right? I should just check with you on every point, is what I should have done. It's gonna happen. The question is, are you gonna crawl back up to your feet again? Elijah was done in the ring. He wanted to stay on the mat. Count me out, I'm finished. God told him, get on your feet, stay in the fight. This is what you're going to do. Resilience is a choice. It is a choice that is strengthened through practice. It's a choice, a deliberate decision that is strengthened through practice. Listen to these words from the Apostle Paul. He wrote this when he was in prison. 2 Corinthians 4:8-9. We are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed and broken. We are perplexed, but we don't give up and quit. We're hunted down, but God never abandons us. We get knocked down, but we get up again and we keep going. That is resilience. If you have to make the decision, I'm not going to stay on the mat, I'm not going to stay down. When I screw up, mess up, whatever it is, I'm going to get back on my feet. If you're facing disillusionment, discouragement, doubt, depletion, despair, God's asking you today, what are you doing here? This is not where I want you. There are a lot of significant people that suffered from despair. Job, Isaiah, Jeremiah, David, and just as a reminder as we go into Holy Week, so did Jesus. Jesus was completely overwhelmed with despair in the Garden of Gethsemane. Then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane. And he said, sit here while I go over there to pray. He took Peter, Zebedee's two sons, and he became anguished and distressed. He told them, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. This was Jesus. Such despair. He felt like it was crushing him to death. If you feel like you're stuck in a cycle, if you feel like you're being crushed, understand what Paul's word said. I'm going to read it again. You're pressed on every side by troubles, but you are not crushed and broken. You're perplexed, but that doesn't mean you give up and quit. You may feel hunted down, but God never abandons you. Even if you get knocked down, get back up. That's how you get out of those cycles. That's how you get out of those prisons that the enemy tries to keep you in mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. Victory can be yours if we'll do these things.